I'm down. I'm down. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Oath Happy Hour. I hope your week is going well. Bitcoin is pumping. That's cool. That's exciting. Things are getting kind of frothy. Um, yeah, so I've kindly dumped the responsibility of the topic for this call all on Yuvi. Um, and he's nice enough um, to give us a quick lesson on control theory in DeFi and what that actually means. Um, so I'm pretty excited about that, and I'm very grateful to Yuvi for championing this happy hour. I did want to start off with just like some thoughts and some reflections about Oath and our ecosystem, because there's been a lot of discussion recently, and obviously sentiment has been better. And I know it's hard to see Bitcoin breaching 60K and Oath kind of struggling. And yeah, I just wanted to offer my some thoughts about this and about like the future of our ecosystem and connect with you guys and maybe start some sort of dialogue about this. I know it's hard to see as someone who is kind of on the outside or just in the community who um, doesn't really see the day-to-day activities. But as someone who is privy to what's going on daily, I can't stress enough how excited I am and how bullish I am every day on what's being built. Um, our goals, I know this has been said before, but our goals of oath adoption are exactly aligned with all of yours. Like we are some of the biggest bag holders. It would be hard to say that we as an entire group don't want the same things as people working on it in the community all together. It's not really a secret that we got a bit shafted debuting our tech first on optimism, and as probably people know by now, and DeFi and optimism is down pretty bad, which is sad to see. Hindsight's 2020, and there are clearly probably some more favorable options for us looking back on it. But with this new direction, like we're solving that problem and becoming a chain agnostic ecosystem. And what isn't completely clear in the immediate sense is how all of this horizontal development ties into Oath as a token that can represent all of this tech. And that's totally fair. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that everyone is extremely cognizant of the situation, and like we are building extremely hard. And there's a lot of things happening that I can't divulge, not because we're trying to be sneaky or opaque or anything. Like legally, I can't just come out and tell you all exactly what's going on in the background. But all I want, is to see Oath succeed. And the amount of work that continues to be poured into that goal is immense, even if most of it isn't really visible to everyone yet. So kind of
Yeah,
pandered around there, but I hope I hope that made sense to everybody.
yeah. I want to highlight, I guess, that like obviously the first chapter, Aurelius. If we're to look at this platform, I mean, barely in its infancy, but the trajectory of Aurelius is really exciting. Um, you know, the TVL, the opportunity of the Mantle ecosystem itself, and the network buy-in, and then with some new things that we're developing, like points for all of our protocol systems moving forward. We're supercharging our ecosystem to be able to funnel attention into Aurelius, and then of course we'll be trying our hardest to uh, capture as much of that into the bonded oath system, as described. And then we want to repeat this just 10 more times, basically. That's kind of what we're trying to create, such that as as someone, that is staking Earth, you are receiving always the hottest new network. We are uh, blessed to have more opportunity than ever before, especially with the recent market sentiment. And like all of these ecosystems are like, holy hell, how do we get protocols on our network right now so that we can actually take in all of this new liquidity? And they all really love Aurelius. They all really love the power of the CDP. With this integrated lending market, it solves two issues with one fell swoop. They don't have to convince Maker and Aave to come. They can just get the Oath ecosystem. So, well, I think one of the things that frustrates people that I think we need to make more of a priority, in spite of those opportunities, perhaps, but the 0% APR issues that are on Ethos, they're confusing. People are interpreting things as if they're broken. I think this sort of harkens back to the Oath ecosystem super app proposal from Don Sober. I think many of it's still the same thing. And I guess what I want to highlight is that, like, if you look at Aurelius, it's taking one step closer towards that super app. And I think that we're going to continue making these steps horizontally. And while it's not on Ethos, it is the same system. It's the same application. So once we are, finished developing these new opportunities, which, as Charles indicates, we're working on the best judgment towards maximum ROI for the especially bonded oath system. If we are to push all these improvements to Ethos, the upside to bonded oath, like APRs, will be negligible compared to the impact that this Aurelius token will hopefully be able to create, and then the ones that follow it. Not that we don't want to get Ethos fixed up, and I think it is a very valid criticism, and it's simply just that the organization and the ecosystem is being just stretched to its absolute limit of capacity with so much, and we need to bring everyone in on the understanding of just how much technology we're talking about. So this is something that I'm trying to document at the moment, and hopefully we'll be able to distribute with you all soon to sort of showcase the steps of progression since the Reaper Farm journey, towards Ethos and Reliquary, and then being on Optimism and being on all these chains, and now consolidating and then realizing that an omni-chain presence with this mothership suits us. And I think our narrative is becoming more clear, and we're beginning to define our own narrative much more with much more strength. And I know Justin's in ETH Denver at the moment. If any of you are there, do reach out as well. But things are exciting, and I suppose we'll have to wait for Justin to return and for ETH Denver to conclude. But soon we will be able to, as Charles says, maybe have a more I guess not structured but prepared documentation for you guys to see what we mean when we say there's all of this technology. What is all of this technology? Well, all the different strategies that power Reaper vaults, all the infrastructure, all the web packages. There's literally 200 different projects that are in our GitHub, which just completely outmasses the competition quite a lot. So bringing them all together into more super apps per chain seems like the natural progression for how we do things. And the good news is there's a lot of interest. So we look forward to sharing more of what that interest actually is materializing in. But for now, Aurelius, I think, a very good demonstration of things to come. And the market certainly is in a position where, we feel like, wow, we're nearly at this point where revenues could become quite large again in this space. We're coming out of a period where it was hard for Reaper to make money, for example, because LP farming was just like kind of like a nothing for a little bit. But in these environments, it may make sense to start investing in some of those tools again. And that's when we see a lot of convenience come back to our ecosystem. And I think that's what a lot of us crave, to be honest. I mean, that's how we all found Reaper to begin with. So just keep in mind that we're not losing any technology every step we take and every piece we add on. We're gaining more, and we're getting much better at stringing these things together to create much more intricate ecosystems that are much more robust. And I guess that can be the segue into our control system discussion, if you will. How do you feel about that, Yuvi? Am I teeing it up nice for you here?
Yeah, I mean,
Actually, I wanted to.
go ahead, Charles.
I just wanted to mention, speaking of Aurelius and other chapters and stuff, Ironclad is right. It went live already. I saw Mode send out a tweet about Ironclad. Um, but am I overstepping at all? That happened. Can someone back me up here?
Yeah, so this
Ironclad's
is
out. Yeah.
this is like a new network on the Optimism superchain, and it's called. We have an application there which is now a part of the Mode program. It's called Ironclad. It's built off of a silo, but Mode's getting, they're looking at Aurelius and they're saying, hey, hold on, we actually think a CDP would do really well on our network too. So it may be now moving more towards like a chapter 2. So kind of like where Aurelius ended up, because these two things, they just work so well together. We're really impressed with the efficiency of Aurelius. I mean, $1 goes in, but a minimum of $1.95. I mean, $1 on the CDP side generates a minimum of $1.95 in the TVL, and a lot of people's base security assumptions come from TVL. Like trust is a measure of TVL in some ways in this space, because if you cannot get people's trust, then your TVL will stay low, or else you have a product issue perhaps. But the Aurelius is showing that it has the capacity to absorb a lot of network success and volume. And not only that, the loans on Aurelius are extremely competitive. So we're seeing an actual use case here and an improvement on the system such that they make sense to pair together. So where possible, we think that all lending markets should have a CDP really sort of feeding into them. But yeah, Ironclad on Mode, which is a very cool network on Optimism, and it might, like Base, be just part of how Optimism can stay relevant in this sort of modular space. And yeah, we're really excited to sort of see what we can learn from the Mode team. They're actually they come from more of a marketing background. The whole blockchain is basically from this founder of one of the most successful marketing ventures in this Web3 space. So we actually see it as a really strong connection for us because as some people have been identifying and as we've obviously been making steps to improve our marketing initiatives, partnering up with titans like that have invested success in the applications we're producing. This is the ingredients for success, we think. So we're really excited to learn a lot from Mode and give them the opportunity to grow their network with the tools of something like Aurelius.
We've already mentioned that the Mode points and how they integrate with the Ironclad.
Yeah, I briefly touched on it, but definitely if you're familiar with Mantle Journey or any of the other onboarding ecosystem points programs, Mode has commenced theirs, and I think in the last 3 weeks they've managed to hit nearly 100 mil TVL now. So it's starting to pick up I think, a little bit of interest and validation from the market. And you can now deposit on Ironclad and begin earning points for that mode airdrop. So if
You'll
this
never
is like a
catch me
network,
on the leaderboard.
yeah, Charles has already got a head start. He did disclose that today. What have you been doing on there, Charles? Were you using the other lending market though? Because Ironclad only
I
kicked
was
off.
using Ionic. Yeah, I was using Ionic, and I will be doing the same with Ironclads. But yeah, I was also LPing on an exchange there, but I was basically just I think both of those protocols also have their own point systems. But yeah, just doing as much stuff as possible. Getting a little bit of leverage on ETH, kind of through the like I guess half leverage, 1.5, by borrowing through the lending market and then LPing on the exchange. So yeah, just but even if you bridge, if you just bridge to mode and just hold ETH there, if that's like all you want to do, um, then you'll get a decent number of points. I would say dropping your ETH in a lending market is pretty is a better way to go. So yeah, and one last
And
thing
you
I
can
wanted to
probably
say on this
assume
topic.
that
Oh,
we'll probably do Ironclad points as well. So Aurelius is going to be our first version of a points program, and we'll obviously glean any insights we can and port them over to every other sort of application that follows it. Unfortunately, like it or not, this behavioral incentive mechanism for airdrop farming, can't see it going anywhere. It's pretty powerful. And we're seeing like networks just love it. They're getting really fantastic results. And even users, I think, prefer it. That's sort of my take so far off of what I've been getting across all my different channels. But yeah, I would love anyone's feedback, and please come try the Aurelius program. Give us some feedback. Keep pushing. We are, and I'll pass it back over to you, Charles.
One last thing I wanted to say before I kick it over to Yuvi was just to acknowledge Health's comments. I believe that's Thomas on Twitter, about more communication wherever we can on like the roadmap and financial situation and stuff like this. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and agree with him or her about upping those kinds of comms, and maybe balancing, balancing the back end with the front end, sort of stuff that's going on. Front end being community facing things. So, anyways, thanks for the comments, Health, and they were seen. Yeah, well, in any case, Yuvi, are you prepared to tell us about control theory? What is that?
Well, interesting that you should ask that, Charles, because here is a presentation on control theory as it pertains to DeFi.
So you guys need to know that
So
Yuvi threw this together in like an hour. I'm insanely impressed.
I was extremely prepared. What is going? Cat Dad, are you just shilling your Blast Pepe? Anyway, we will crack on. Control theory in DeFi. This is going to wrap up into all of our products generating more revenue and reducing risk. But I will teach you guys a little bit about the basics of control theory, and hopefully you find it beneficial. So this is what a PID controller looks like. Can you guys see my mouse moving if I point to stuff?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So all you need to, like, this looks very complicated, but all you need to know is that this represents a signal process. Okay, so all of these, this R of t, E of t, U of t, and Y of t, they're all signal functions. So basically, some kind of signal, which is R of t, goes in here. The circles are just basic arithmetics, and then the boxes are some kind of function that transforms the signal. So you can, if you follow the lines, you can see this is like a Y of t, which is some kind of output, and then it loops back around. It gets subtracted from some kind of input R of t, which generates some other kind of signal, and then each one goes through some kind of function. They all get added up to generate a new kind of signal, and then that goes through the equation to create a new output. Okay, so all you have to think about is that each kind of point along the chain is some kind of signal, and then you're just doing some maths at every stop. This is like a full, there's a PID control, there's a full control system. This is as far as DeFi has gotten so far, where we have some kind of signal goes in, some kind of function occurs, and some kind of signal goes out. And the best example I can give you guys is Aave lending markets, which also translate in effect to granary lending markets, where, it's the math class, where you have like the system recognizes some kind of utilization on a market, and it takes that utilization, it puts it through an equation, which is our famous Aave rate equations, and then it spits out an interest rate. Okay, so the basic DeFi example of control theory is that you have a utilization input, it goes through an equation, and you have an interest rate output. In order to kind of explain how control theory works better, the example I'm going to use is cruise control in a car. So here we have the same thing where the throttle position is the input. There's some kind of equation, which is, somewhere between the air going in and the fuel mixing and then burning and making power and whatnot. And then you have speed coming out. Okay, but this, in terms of signal processing, you tell the car a throttle position, the throttle is open this much, and it will end up by giving you some kind of car speed. Okay, when you have cruise control, what happens is that you still have a modified signal in this case, but the speed comes out. That speed output, it's the same speed output, but what happens is it's fed back into the cruise controller. So if you're supposed to be doing 60 k's an hour, but you're only doing 50 k's an hour, your reference speed, which is cruise control, will say 60. Your current speed, which is 50, let's say you've just gone up a hill, right? So your throttle position is the same, but you've just gone up a hill, so now your speed drops off. So now your speed's 50. It's going to say 60 minus 50 is 10, which means the error in this case is 10. There's going to be 3 different equations that govern what happens to that signal. So it's going to pass through a proportional, an integral, and a derivative function or gain of some sort. So that 10 is going to pass through. It's going to see a different type of error. So instead of 10, maybe initially it sees 10, and then over time it sees 11, and then 12, and then 13. So the car's still doing 50 when it wants to do 60, but it thinks it's doing 49, 48, 47. So it thinks it's constantly getting slower, which is going to pass through a plant process, which is going to then increase the amount of throttle position that is supposed to be there. Okay, so this little piece is inside this plant process where we have what's called a closed loop. So now, instead of here where you open the throttle to a certain spot and then that generates a certain speed, and when you go up a hill, that speed reduces, and when you go down a hill, that speed increases, and there's nothing you can do about it. We have a system that actually checks the speed and then adjusts the position of the throttle accordingly to make sure that you get back to your reference speed. So we can bring that back to our DeFi current designs, right? Where we have utilization that comes in, we have the Aave equations, and then we have some interest rate that comes out. The system that I have proposed, which I've written contracts for and just requires some security reviews, and we'll actually start testing it pretty soon, is that we reference the optimal utilization, and we circle back our interest rates in a closed loop, and we actually check our utilization error. Okay, something that Aave and currently Granary don't do is reference their utilization error. They just check utilization, and the curve kind of accounts for where optimal is supposed to be, but there's no way for it to self-correct. And we see that on the Menace market, where the utilization on stablecoins is super duper high, and the interest rates are super duper high, but the interest rates are defined by the equation, and there's nothing anyone can do other than wait for utilization to change and hope that that kind of interest rate is enough for people to pay back their loans. So here we pass our utilization through PI and D, we add them together to get a modified signal, and then that goes through the equation to give us a new interest rate. The proportional gain is, as the name suggests, it's just a proportion of the error. So if it's 1, then the error goes in and it comes out and it's the same. You can also make it double the error, you can make it halve the error, you can change it however the system needs to be tuned. The integral error accounts for if you track the error signal over time, so the error is sustained, then the area under the curve, we're going to be crazy here, but the area under the curve gets accumulated. So when error is sustained, then the output of the I term will increase because the I term multiplies by the area under the curve. It's the integrator, right? For anyone who did high school maths, you probably learned about integrals being the area under the curve. So we measure that area under the curve, then we multiply it by something. We can multiply it by something very, very small to have a very small time bias, or we can multiply it by something really big so that if error is sustained for a very short amount of time, it will change very quickly. We also have a derivative error, which measures the rate of change of utilization. Okay, so if utilization starts going up, then the error increases, so we have some kind of error compensation. But if it goes up very, very quickly, then we can add an additional compensation for that. Or if it goes up very, very slowly, then maybe that compensation needs to be a bit less. Now, all these types of compensations do... Oh, yeah, sorry, jump in if I'm going a bit too fast.
I just want to, repeat what you're saying, and to see if it maybe it'll help us click.
And I have some graph examples for this a little bit later, but go ahead.
So the current system across DeFi is that there's just a curve, and the maximum rates are defined by that curve, right?
Correct.
That's system 1. What you're saying is in system 2, the rate should be informed by almost the duration of the utilization. Is that fair to say? Like,
that's fair to say.
If prolonged utilization is high, then it will just keep going higher, such that
Correct.
Eventually that rate will either get diluted or paid back because it's just so outrageous.
Correct.
Okay. Hope that helps everyone.
Yeah, and something that could add some context would be if you remember when Michael from Curve, I think that's how you say his name, he had that massive loan, right? And he's like, that's pretty much, he's just always got that on. He's got a huge loan of Curve. And like he wasn't paying it back, and everybody was worried about, all this Curve being liquidated on the market, and if the market could absorb it. But the lending market that he would pay back first, or the lending market that is the least likely to accrue bad debt from that situation happening, is the one where he's like, it's going to be saying every, call it 24 hours. So that like, over a couple of days, he's going to be paying that back with haste, as opposed to the lending market that just kind of sits and, doesn't change even if he's comfortable paying that rate for, however many days. And I think, Yuvi, have you checked out Fraxlend? Because they have somewhat of a similar. It's definitely, it's probably a different design difference. Essentially, their interest rate, it doubles every 24 hours or something if it's above a certain level of utilization. and Michael paid for Axel down like basically immediately, and then just like was able
Yeah.
to leave it
So that
open
was.
on Aave and
So I'm
stuff.
pretty sure that system isn't automatic. It's like it was like it's human intervention. They went through governance and they decided to do that. So this system
okay.
works with no human intervention whatsoever. Now I'm quickly going to answer some questions that are in the chat here before I continue. If something went wrong, how bad would it be? There's actually not a lot that can go wrong because all this does is govern the interest rate on the lending on the market, right? So it's got no access to funds. Secondly, we can put pretty concrete parameters into the contract that set minimum and maximum. So if it shits the bed and thinks that something crazy has happened and it absolutely boosts interest rates, we can just put a cap on that to be a reasonable maximum, which would just be, I guess, the equivalent of what the Aave curve max might be. So that if it does that, it doesn't just liquidate everyone instantly, right? All it does is set interest rates. It doesn't touch user funds. It doesn't do anything like that. And while the explanation is pretty complicated, the maths, when it boils down to like contract architecture, it's actually quite simple. So firstly, there's not a lot that can go wrong, and secondly, we can mitigate most of the risk. Question of how it works with looping vaults, since demand would be consistent. Eventually, the interest rate would make the looping vault unprofitable, so the vault would have to be lever right and restart. Yep, absolutely right. So the way that Reaper farm looping vaults work is that they actually run a simulation of potential looping parameters, and then it picks the most profitable one. And if there's no profitable option, then it just won't loop. But the point is that it will, at least our systems will just fork that network in a simulation environment, and it will just simulate looping strategies, find something profitable. If it finds something, it'll do it. So it doesn't like screw over looping vaults or anything like that. There's also there's no need for interest rates to skyrocket very, very quickly. It's a long tail risk mitigation. So interest rates can actually climb pretty slowly and still achieve a pretty good effect, giving looping vaults and not 24/7 active participants plenty of time to manage their positions. And yes, it will allow markets to not be locked to full utilization as time goes on, because it'll continue to increase rates, and you'll see examples of it in a second. So we've discussed proportional, integral, and derivative gains. So we can compensate for the size of the error. So if our optimum utilization is 50% and we're at 90%, the interest rate will be higher than if it was 80%. That makes sense. That's normal. If it stays at 90%, the interest rate will continue to grow over time until utilization comes back to 50%, which is what we want. And if it goes from 50% to 90% over like a few months versus a few weeks, then the interest rates will grow differently. If it goes to 90% really, really quickly, then the system will actually spike interest rates on behalf of itself in order to mitigate such a sharp increase in utilization. Okay, so the example that I give is the Aave volatile strategy. We can see here their optimum usage is 45%. They have their variable rate slope increases at a rate of 4% until it hits optimum, and then it increases at a rate of 300%. And what that looks like is this. So the Aave system, when utilization goes from 0 to 100%, the interest rate just climbs slowly. At 45%, it hits 4% interest rate, and then it climbs drastically until at 100% utilization, it hits 300% interest rates. The problem is that if the market wants to accept high interest rates, they absolutely can, and utilization can sit as high as the market wants it to, and there's nothing pushing the market to correct, which means that the protocol is exposed to high utilization and to risk of bad debt, etc., which is what we've seen with the curve situation. We're currently seeing it with some issues with stablecoins. So stablecoins have a different curve. Stablecoins generally have an optimal utilization around 80 to 90%, depending on how liquid they are, which means that curve moves very differently. And it's just because stablecoins are much less volatile and generally much more liquid, so you can accept that high utilization, but it does cause issues because from 90 to 100%, there's not a lot of room to move. And sometimes the market can accept those high rates. But the point is that there's no way for this system to correct itself. If we look at utilization going from 0 to 80% and then remaining there, this system would be exactly like the Fed, but automated. I hope to one day replace the Fed. Then this is what the interest rate would look like. It moves along at around 27 or whatever, around here somewhere. We hit that optimum utilization of 45%. And then as the utilization increases past it, our rates shoot up to just under 200%. Now, if utilization stays there, then the rates will just stay at that point, right? Rates just stay at like 190% or whatever it might be. And if the market's happy to accept that risk, then there's absolutely nothing that the lending protocol can do about it but to be exposed to that risk. Or they go through governance and, there's human intervention, and then we lose the whole premise of permissionless decentralized lending that we are striving for. So what's the problem? We just discussed it. Cool. Okay. On the left, we have the Aave curve, which goes up linearly to 4% and then up linearly to 300%. And on the right, we have a transfer function. If you recall that little box, it's called something else here, plant process. This is called a transfer function. This is that equation that translates utilization into the interest rate. Okay, so there has to be some kind of equation. So we have one that looks like this, or this is the equation that I've derived for now. Well, the assets from constantly raised by England has collaterals and that is correct. So what happens when borrower rates are high? All of that revenue from borrowing, Granary or Aave or the protocol generally takes a cut, which when Granary launches new protocols or silos, it's usually 0% to begin with, but then they will increase it to 20% as the volume grows, as the size grows, and the rest of that yield goes to the lending side. So absolutely, if the market is just eating high utilization rates and the rates continue to grow, lenders will just eat lobsters for dinner. Yep. So we have this curve. Of note is the fact that I've gotten rid of this stupid little kink in the Aave curve. It's silly and I don't like it. The way that this curve is defined, it lets me define an individual pass-through point, which in this case I've moved optimum utilization up to 50% instead of 45%, and the pass-through is at 5% interest rate. And it lets me define the maximum, which at 100 is 300 or 3, which is the same as the Aave curve. Okay, but what you might notice is that because it's a curve instead of a line, everywhere else between those points, it's actually much lower. So for example, at 70% utilization, if we go up and across, the Aave system is at 150% interest, whereas here at 70, if we go up and across, we're at only 50% interest. So you might think, well, if the market's happy to take on 50% interest, the utilization in this system is going to be much higher all the time. You can see that issue here where our same example, we go from 0 to 0.8 and sustain it. So the rates go to 200% and then they stay there. If all we have is a proportional gain of 1, which means all we do is reference this equation, then the interest rate will come up with a nice curve as opposed to this ugly curve. But then it only gets to 90% and then it stays there. And that's not good, right? Because now we're exposed to the same risk, but we're just earning less for it, which is just silly. This is where we bring in the I term and the D term, and these are the crux of control theory. So the integral accounts for the past error and integrates over time. This is what I told you guys about before, where we actually get the area under the curve, which is now all of this area, and we multiply it by something kind of small, and we slowly increase rates over time. What we have now, because utilization is above is above the optimum utilization, we're accruing error, which means interest rates are growing. So before, where this system is confined to be at 190% forever, there's nothing they can do about it. This system will actually grow the interest rate. Now on the chart, it grows to about 250%, but that'll actually continue to grow forever until utilization comes back down. If utilization doesn't move, this rate will just grow indefinitely. Everybody will get liquidated, and then it's just good. There's no need to carry extra risk, and we can move along. So what happens if utilization is below? Well, we can actually decay the signal when utilization is below, because what happens is the error flips negative. So if the utilization is below optimal, we have a negative error, which means that we're now accumulating area under the curve, or area below the curve, but it's below the zero line, which means the interest rates will continue to fall. What happens is, as interest rates fall, it becomes more profitable to loop because the borrow rates are dropping. And secondly, it becomes more enticing to borrow, which helps to push the system back up to optimum utilization, right? So in a market where this system might be sitting at a lower utilization than some other platform, these rates will continue to decrease until borrower activity picks up and that optimum utilization is hit. What does that mean? It means there's increased borrower activity. When optimum utilization is reached, because the error is zero, the integrated term is zeroed out, which means that the system will sit at its 5% optimum utilization. And because optimum utilization can be higher with this system because it can correct itself, the net effect is greater revenue, because now instead of optimum utilization being 45%, earning 4%, we can sit at 50% earning 5%. So we can have a greater volume paying slightly higher interest, which translates to greater revenue and more yield for the lending side as well. We also have how often does the system check if utilization is optimum? So it checks utilization as frequently as every other interest rate strategy does, which is basically on every user interaction. Every time someone interacts with the lending market, it checks its utilization and then it updates the interest rate as part of that transaction. And this does the exact same thing. It just does a little bit of maths behind the scenes. The derivative term that I explained, here you can see utilization going from 0 to 80%, but it does it in 30 time steps. Whereas here you can see it go from 0 to the same 80%, but it does it in 70 time steps. Now the only change in the code is the introduction of the derivative term. So when utilization climbs rapidly, interest rates will spike to almost 250%. But then because it stops climbing and it actually plateaus at 80%, the derivative goes to 0, which zeroes out the D term. So interest rates will spike when the utilization flies up to 80%, but when it levels out, that spike is no longer needed and it will drop back down to the normal rate. But then because utilization is sustained at 80%, the interest rates will start to grow again. You can see the same thing happen here where the rates fly up to 80% and then stay there, where this curve would otherwise continue forever. But because because utilization spikes, the interest rates spike, it stops the utilization from continuing. And then when utilization plateaus, rates come back down. And because utilization is sustained, rates start growing again. And what that will do, it will stop aggressive utilization, which gives you some more short-term risk mitigation. If there's some kind of market event that's causing very, very rapid high utilization, it will curb that and it will generate revenue from it because interest rates go high. And then when it's sustained, it will start pushing it back down to optimal by increasing the rates. When it hits optimal utilization, the rates will just flatline at 5% and everything is schmick. But when it deviates from optimum utilization, it will increase or decrease the rates, and it will actually grow or decay those rates over time to push the system back to optimum utilization. What does that mean? If the system can continually self-correct towards optimum utilization, this allows for higher optimum utilization because it allows for better risk management, right? Because it can self-manage the risk of higher utilization. This gives us more borrow volume at the same rates, which means more revenue with less risk, and is applicable to all silos and chapters because they all have some kind of lending market functionality. Does anybody have any questions? Do the money market incentives like Grain or Harbor become dynamic as well as new system? Those money market incentives are controlled. They're almost entirely human intervention because we try to deploy them strategically. So they will stay the same unless we design some kind of control system that governs incentives. But I don't think that's currently planned.
I think if the approach to incentives would change at all with this change in the interest rate system, but I don't see why it would. Like the goal is kind of still the same. It's just the PID system does a better job of getting there, you know.
Yeah.
But like the incentive decisions are kind of aimed at the same thing. So it's just a more efficient
It can
market.
make incentives a bit more efficient insofar as when you have situations like really high utilization on the Metis market, we'll be slightly, we'll be less forced to offer up incentives to the lending side because the borrower side will take care of it because the rates on the borrower side will start to climb. We won't have to incentivize the lending side to try and bring down utilization. I guess those high utilization borrowers will pay for that yield themselves.
Super dope, man. Really cool. Great presentation. I don't know how you did that so quickly, but that was awesome.
I have backup slides. I have backup slides in case. Yeah, this is the model that I created. That's how it works. I made a model for a CDP. Yeah. This is my transfer function. Yeah. There's lots of cool stuff in here. This is the contract code.
Yuvi is mastering DeFi. Maybe he's chatting his way to becoming the president of DeFi.
So
I was actually thinking while you were explaining it, some of the sort of parallels between this and some funding rate mechanisms, because like synthetics, for example, their Perps V3 platform, or maybe it was V2. But anyways, they design, so like funding rates are what either longs pay shorts or shorts pay longs, depending on how skewed the market is. So if there's like a ton of shorts and everybody is short, then the longs are going to get paid to long. And the goal is to balance out longs and shorts equally, so as to protect LPs who are kind of like on the hook for perp gains. But so the synthetics had a system, I think in their V1 or their V2 perps model, where the funding rate only depended on the skew. And like once the skew is established, which is like, how many longs versus shorts there are, once the skew is established, it kind of just like cruised at that rate. And it was exactly, it's like perfectly analogous to this.
Yeah, that's what we call an open loop system.
Yeah. So I think what they introduced like mid last year was velocity as well as skew, which does the same sort of, it achieves the same goal where like depending on how long the skew remains at what it is, it's going to keep increasing the rate sort of exponentially. And it's way better at actually finding a skew or finding a funding rate that's zero or close to zero, which is what you want. I guess it depends on the asset, but um, just the end goal is just protecting LPs way more. And in the lending market scenario, it's protecting the protocol from bad debt and also increasing revenue for suppliers and for the protocol. But it's super analogous to what you're describing here. And if anyone's curious, check out like funding rate mechanisms, because it's the same thing. It's like, do we have a system that can actually react in real time based on what the conditions have been over a sustained period? Um, and like, if nothing is changing, then the system should change to like force something to change. If anyways, I think you get what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
yeah, funding rate design is super interesting as well.
Yeah. What you guys will find, control theory pretty much applies to everything. Every high level piece of engineering that requires any kind of control is going to have control theory, and most likely some form of a PID control system governing it. Where the stakes are low, the industry seems to be pretty happy to shift towards AI, just because you don't have to tune it, and AI can sort of tune itself. But when there are any stakes in it, like when there's any funds or life that's at risk, it's almost always going to be control theory, simply because you can follow every step of the maths and every step of the decision making as discreetly as your tune, which you can't do with AI. AI can see new inputs and make decisions that are not forecasted, which is why when there's any risk involved, systems generally won't use AI. But control theory is like, it's everything and everywhere. I'm sure AS saw it in his time working for defense as well, like missile systems, any kind of trajectory correction technology uses control theory. So yeah, that's the
The only place
hour.
it isn't is in the Fed or in finance, where shit doesn't work a lot of
Yeah,
the
which
time.
is, so when you think about the
Which is
way the
like,
Fed operates,
yeah,
when you actually think about the way the Fed operates, they'll look at inflation being like, they look at their target inflation. It's exactly the same principles. They have some sort of target inflation. Let's say it's 2%, but it's currently like 11% or whatever it might be. So
yeah.
what happens when you model the Fed as a control system? You actually have a control system within this plant process, but it's actually within the feedback loop, which is where inflation governs rates, and then rates govern inflation, and it's cyclical, and it's the same thing I've been dealing with the stablecoin model, where there's like a price. The price of the token governs the interest rate, and the interest rate then governs the price of the token. That's all two closed loop control theories that govern each other. It's very complicated, but anyway, the point is that the Fed will see that something's like wrong with the inflation, and they'll look at the error, and they'll adjust interest rates based on that. And then if it doesn't correct, for example, if inflation remains high, then they continue to increase interest rates, right? Which is the same principles as control theory, where over time they'll continue to increase interest rates until inflation comes back down. The only difference is that it's not an automated system. It's like 12 rich people meeting up once a month to decide what the new interest rate should be.
Yeah, and the other thing is they're not working with current data. It's like they have to work with data that's been collected from a period that's already passed. And
Correct.
then that plus just like, just humans making decisions kind of instinctually rather than having something like this. Getting constant, instant feed of data that you can just like tweak in real time. Yeah.
So yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's the intro to control theory. I hope everybody found it informative. I hope it wasn't overly technical or complex. I tried to kind of distill it a bit. It can get as crazy as you want it to get. And if anyone wants to have one of those crazy chats, I'm more than happy to. But that's kind of the basics covered today. This, if
Dude,
nothing else,
that
just
was
take
awesome.
this away.
Yeah.
Everything in DeFi is open loop, and we're trying to close that loop by returning the signal back into itself to actually self-correct. So yeah,
Oh, so beast.
thanks for coming
So
along,
beast.
everyone.
And actually, what's cool is if you can send me these slides, I can like lay them over the audio as well, so recording listeners can get the benefit of visuals, because it's probably gonna be hard to follow along. That's with
Yeah,
audio.
cool. I mean,
So
I jumped
send
around
me
the
the
slides
slides
a lot,
through.
so I apologize. But yeah,
I'll do my best. I'll do my best. It'll give me a nice
okay.
review session. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Again, thank you, Yuvi. That was super sick. And you've done it again, sir. Um, but thanks for coming, guys. And
You're all
we'll
very
catch
welcome.
you with the next one. Hey, if anyone has something that a topic that they would like to see for happy hour, personally, I need to be more on top of these in terms of notifying people earlier. But if you guys have any topics you want us to talk about, just say it in the Discord. Tag me. Don't be afraid to ping myself, and we can get it popping. Right. Cool. With
Did
that, I'm
someone say
gonna
they
end.
want to learn about Moon? I think someone said they want to learn about Moon.
Oh shit! No way. It was so fast I didn't even see it. Yeah. Moon episode would be really dope. See if we can make that happen. There it is. Okay, I'm gonna end the call. Thanks for coming, y'all. Have a good weekend.